Our first speaker on the distribution marketing and team track is Kathryn Minshew. She is CEO and founder of the Muse, and she's going to talk to us about Young and the Restless, how to hire and retain millennials in an unsexy world. Please welcome Kathryn to the floor.
Thank you. So that was a really tough act to follow. Awesome. I wish I had Muppets in my presentations. I'm sorry to disappoint you guys. So I'm Kathryn Minshew, founder and CEO of a company called The Muse that helps about 1 million people a month figure out what they want to do with their life, what job they'd like next, how to get it. And we're working with about 115 companies, including maybe 5 or 6 at this conference. So I wanted to kind of take you through a couple of things we've learned in the last few years, 4 big areas. It's basically the ABCs of understanding, attracting, finding, interviewing, and onboarding really great people. So why you should care about hiring, how it's different, especially in the last year or two, how it's different in startups, what you're competing against, how to understand and find what some of these great people you're looking for are seeing out there, how you can attract them to your company. Once you've got them in the door, how do you interview them? Make sure that's a very positive experience. You're getting a lot out of it. They're getting a lot out of it. They still want to join your company at the end of the interview, which is not always the case. And then once you've got your dream team, how do you make sure that they're joining the company and kind of working for you? So I'll try and be brief and keep an eye on my time. Firstly, so hiring, why should I care? Obviously, people talk a lot about how important it is to build a great team, and you guys all know the basics. It's very, very competitive out there, particularly for certain skill sets. Top people have a lot of companies coming after them. It's very expensive. Making a bad hiring decision can cost the company a lot of money, can cost you a lot of time, and it's definitely better to do it right the first time around. In fact, culture fit is one of the things that causes a lot of problem in the hiring space, because as candidates have more and more options, and as job flexibility and kind of movement within careers become more common, the number of people who are not working out or who are leaving to find a better fit is also higher. I found some of these statistics to be a little bit staggering when I first heard about them, that 75% of candidates don't move past the first stage of the interview, the hiring process, because they're not the right fit. And then the last one, that nearly half of new hires leave their jobs within a year. Again, this means if you're not finding the right people, making sure they're right for your company and not just for that role in particular, you're likely going to suffer a lot of turnover and retention, which will hurt the business in the long frame. And if you're like me, and you think that employee well-being, happiness contributes and is a big driver of productivity and innovation, then it's probably pretty depressing to learn that a lot of surveys are coming back with stats like only 3 in 10 workers in the US are engaged in their jobs. So obviously, you want 10 out of 10 workers in your company to be engaged in their jobs. So how do you make that happen? How do you do it right? To start with, I want to talk about 3 big areas of hiring that we see a lot of at the Muse. One is understanding what attracts top people. Not all amazing people are the same, but what are some of the dimensions that people are considering when they're choosing what job to take next? Secondly, I want to talk about how you sell your company like you sell your product. I think it's amazing how many websites you go to, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen these, where the front page is this beautiful, glossy, interactive sales pitch for the product. There might be a video. There's all of these tools about how to use it. And then you click on careers or hiring, and it looks like a DOS robot threw up on the screen. It's like, come click here. It's so unappealing. And if you have the luxury of hundreds of people beating down your door to work for you, that's fantastic, and you don't need some of what I'm about to tell you. But most of us here, I think, you want to find really, really good people, and it's not always easy to do that, even if your company is a fantastic place to work. And then the last thing is, again, you've got to get the word out. For many of us, it's not only enough to figure out what people want, sell your company, kind of create that match, but you actually have to also find these people and figure out where they're hiding. So some quick background. As I've mentioned, but the way that really great candidates are thinking about their careers is changing, and people are no longer very concentrated in one specific industry. So you're often not only competing with other startups for a candidate, but you're competing with corporations. You may be competing with a government job, with a nonprofit offer, with a position in China or in India or in some other place that is a kind of interesting growth opportunity in another dimension for that candidate. People are moving jobs more than ever before. The average tenure is pretty low. And people now more than ever are starting to see that career advancement is more important than salary. And that's not going to be news to a lot of people in this room, because I think many of us probably took a pay cut or took no pay at all for a period of time to do what we're doing now. But it is actually a big change in the overall market, that more and more, particularly people in the first 10 to 15 years of their career, but you see it at all age ranges, are starting to prioritize a number of things other than salary, and career advancement is one of them. And this is also great because it's hard for a lot of us in startups to compete on salary, but we can compete on the other dimensions. So when you look at top candidates out there, a lot of the people that are getting multiple offers, what you're seeing more and more is that what they're looking for is the work that they're going to be doing, who they're doing it with, who they're doing it for, what are the people involved, what's the workplace like. And another way to do this was an international global talent agency looked at hiring decisions across tens of thousands of people and broke it down into 4 big factors. I think these are actually pretty interesting. So the first is brand. This, in a kind of obvious sense, if you are someone like Coca-Cola, there are a lot of people who hear about the brand and want to work for you. For smaller companies, you don't necessarily have the brand recognition, but it can be really helpful when thinking about how to attract hires to think about what aspects your brand does have, whether you've been mentioned in industry press. A lot of people think about that when they're providing testimonials for their product, but they don't necessarily think about it when they're providing testimonials for employees. And seeing that someone important in your space has called your product really revolutionary or really interesting can be a great way to get an engineer or a great marketer on board, in addition to simply being a way to get people to sign up for your product. And actually take a step back really quick and say, for these 4 dimensions, you don't have to be fantastically successful in all of them. In fact, most companies aren't. The idea is to understand what are a couple of the different dimensions that people are looking at and figure out for your company, what am I the most awesome at? What is it that people are going to come to me for? So for us, especially in the early days, hiring at the Muse, it was never brand. We weren't going to be able to compete on brand, but we could look at opportunity, purpose, and culture. Opportunity quickly being the opportunity for advancement. So stretch assignments, the ability to hit professional goals, the ability to progress in your career and have opportunities you may not have elsewhere because of this specific job or this specific company. Purpose is either a game-changing business model or a social good. A lot of companies can really kind of out-hire what you would expect of a company of their size or resources by appealing to candidates that are very, very passionate about either disrupting something, changing something, or helping a specific population. And that can be a really, really strong play for some companies here. And the last is culture. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on culture in a second because I think it's something that every single person in this room can control. And I'm obviously a big believer in the importance of creating a company culture and setting yourself up now for the 5th hire, the 10th hire, the 50th hire, and the 500th hire that you'll hopefully all get to make. So firstly, actually, this is just another stat. Lots of people willing to take pay cuts, not hugely surprising to this room. So first I want to talk about what not to do. I don't think this is a very effective job ad. In fact, I think this is an employment branding fail. There are a lot of positions out there that use 3 paragraphs of text and a massive list of requirements to try and entice people to work at your company. And again, if you have a global brand that people already want to work for, you may be able to get away with this. But if you are a startup that no one has heard of, it will not work for you in most cases. So how can you be more effective? How can you actually go out there, kind of break through the clutter of these big brands and get your company, whether or not people have heard of it, in kind of in the attention of some of these amazing people? There's 3 different things. And the first one is really defining company culture and thinking about what is it that you can offer that no one else can. So firstly, a quick definition. I kind of define company culture as a shared set of values, beliefs, and norms that guide interactions within an organization. And this means that top candidates are often looking at your company and they're asking themselves, what would my life be like if I applied to this job or I accepted this role? And the more that you can answer that question, often the higher chance you will have of competing against an offer that is higher salary, more well-defined, et cetera. The second point I want to make on culture is that culture is not perks. Culture is more than a ping pong table. It's fascinating to me how many people I talk to and I say, tell me about your company culture. And they're like, oh, it's awesome. We have a free gym membership. We give free snacks to everyone. There's lunch in the office. Those are all great things. They're all great benefits. They're all great perks. They're ultimately not culture. People might ultimately be interested in your company because of the perks that you have, but they will stay for the culture and the values that you've created. And again, if you compete based on perks, you can be outcompeted based on perks. And I don't think that's necessarily a great place to be, especially when you're going up against some of the money in the valley right now. So great cultures do a couple of things. One is that they're very, very deliberate about who they are and who they are not. This is a picture from a profile of Kiva on the Muse. And what's really interesting is if you watch the videos and look at everything that Kiva says about themselves, they have a very kind of family-focused culture. There's a very strong ethos of caring and sharing. There's a video of a guy talking about how they have a table in the office called the Table of Wonders. And if you bring food in, you have to put it on the Table of Wonders and email the whole office so that everyone knows that there's food there. People love that who work at Kiva. Twilio is a really interesting counterexample. They pride themselves very much on being kind of scrappy, hardcore, very, very self-reliant. The way people talk about the company, the way they talk about each other is very different. And everyone in this room probably knows one or two people who would be intensely happy at both of these organizations, but they're probably not the same person. Secondly, you want to tell a story. When you think about your company culture, what it's like to work at your company, you want to make choices to say, this is who we are, and this is who we're not. Because if you try and be for everyone, you'll often end up with a very bland, generic company culture, whereas the companies that choose very specific things to point out about their culture and to emphasize often ends up with some people who say, that's not for me, and other people who are passionate enthusiasts, and that puts you in a great position in the market. I think visual are very important for a few reasons. So this is kind of an example of our profile from AOL. You get a pretty good sense by looking at the office, reading some of the text, and then watching videos of employees talking about specifically what it's like to work there. And I'll go back to this in a second, but your existing employees can be one of your best assets for communicating to other people why it is that working at your company is such an interesting opportunity. Visual is a shift that we're seeing kind of across the rest of the web. These are probably not new statistics to you. 90% of information processed by the brain is visual, 60,000 times faster than text. But what is interesting is the effects this is having on sharing, on e-commerce, on a number of other factors. In fact, social media posts, articles, and job listings with visuals are both shared more, they're recommended more, they're viewed more, and they're engaged with more. And this is something that I very much encourage all of you to think about as you build out career pages. I think content is very much king again, and it's visuals that are leading the way. Again, comparing what you can do with an advertisement like this. This is also from the Muse, and still lots of examples from our site, compared to the sort of text space that you see. And thirdly, you want to communicate through multiple mediums. So obviously, the classic job sites are great resources for some people, depending on the position you're hiring for and how large your company is. LinkedIn and Indeed are two of the big ones that a lot of people in startups have had success hiring off of. There's obviously a lot of upcoming next-gen sites. AngelList does an amazing job. Glassdoor. I have to plug my own site, the Muse. We help a lot of people hire positions kind of across the board. You also obviously are probably passing positions out to your network, but it can be really helpful to think about not only your employees' network, but the people that they know and the people that they know, and asking and packaging your job materials to be shared as far as possible, and offering people as much as you can incentives, and even sometimes just asking people, like, do you know anyone this would fit? Do you know any listservs that you could share this with? Can be a really great way to extend the reach. And the last one is lurking. I am a big fan of lurking. I actually know a number of people who have gotten employees by doing everything from stalking interesting commenters on Hacker News and then reached out to see if they were looking for a job. I know one person who, when a massive music company was hit by a huge lawsuit, went to LinkedIn, found all of the engineers of that company, and followed them on Twitter with a nice note that if they were looking for a new job, that this person was hiring. It's kind of an interesting strategy, and it depends, again, at your size. But when you're very, very small and you're looking for the right person, if you see someone out there who seems like they're speaking your language and they might be a good fit, it's never a bad thing to establish a relationship early. Even if they're not looking for a job now, they certainly may be in 6, 12, or 18 months. Then there's a couple other things. I've mentioned your career site, your own kind of yourcompany.com/careers, but it's a great way to tell people who are already expressing some interest in your company that this is what you have to offer. This is Twitter's career page. Again, they've got a number of different things and rotating photos. They give you a bit of a sense and kind of draw you in. Content marketing can be really effective. Some of you guys are doing this for your product already, but again, a lot of the things that apply to selling a product can also apply to selling your company to potential hires. HubSpot does an amazing job of this. This is their blog. While a lot of their pieces are targeted at getting new users of their product, they also do a whole bunch that spread a message, sometimes overtly and sometimes very subtly, about how much fun it is to work at HubSpot. And again, it's not about a very generic sort of fun. They're quite specific in what it's actually like to work at HubSpot. Some people are going to see this and think, I would never, ever want to work there. And other people will see it and say, I wasn't even thinking about looking for a new job, but this sounds so fascinating that I might submit an application. And that's the type of people that you want. Again, using your employees as evangelists or ambassadors. As a founder, it's often, I think, very hard. You are expected to be the ultimate evangelist. You obviously, have the most faith in the company. But what can be even more effective in recruiting people who have a number of offers is getting some of your employees to talk to them. Obviously, this is kind of contingent on you having employees that are very passionate about working at your company. But if you do, it can be amazing to connect them and let them have conversations that they might not be willing to have in front of you to help that person understand and get them over the hump to say yes to your offer. And then finally, we're seeing some pretty crazy stuff, people recruiting on Twitter and social media. Everything from organizations like NPR not only has their regular NPR Twitter handle, but they have one called NPR Jobs. These are a couple companies that were tweeting in February. A number of organizations are now doing Twitter chats focused on hiring. And so you can look both for, this was a social media week Twitter chat that we held in February, but there are kind of engineering focused or marketing focused Twitter chats. And it's interesting, a lot of them, for this one, we had probably a couple dozen businesses tweet out job openings, and then something like 1,400 candidates tweet out their 140-character resume. And especially if you're someone who doesn't like going through page upon page upon page of very in-depth resumes, it was actually kind of a neat way to get a pretty quick view into all of these candidates. So great. They're like, all right, Kathryn, very helpful. I have a pretty good idea of how I'm going to attract some good people, package them up. Now they're applying to my site. How do I interview them? What's really interesting is that most people think of an interview, especially the first 1 or 2 interviews, as a one-way street, that you are deciding whether this candidate is right for you. And while that's definitely correct, you'd be amazed how many people actually get turned off of companies during the first phases of the interviews. So I think it's actually very important to think deliberately about how to structure your interviewing in a way that is both effective at analyzing and discovering which people that you're interviewing are going to be a good fit for you, but also making sure that if they are a good fit for you, that they're leaving the interview with a really excited impression of your team. So the first one, obviously, choosing the optimal format. When we interviewed for salespeople, we did a 15-minute phone screen and then had them call one of the founders based on a couple pages of information we gave them and pitch us our product in a 30-minute call. It was a pretty intense trial by fire, but the people that succeeded were absolutely fantastic at selling and also genuinely came with a deep love of the product. If you're hiring for an engineer, on the other hand, you may want to do a technical screen. You may want to bring them in very early on to meet with the team, since working style and brainstorming together is so much more important. But I would say ahead of time, I'm often surprised by how many people don't think through, this is exactly the format that I want to interview people in, and this is how many steps it will take. So unless you're a very amazing company, it can be hard to put people through about 4 rounds of interviews without seriously upsetting them. And again, some people decide to pride themselves on a very long and involved interview process, but unless you're very, very good at that, I tend to think that around 4 touch points, 4 different interviews is about as most that you can go. Excellent. Second is setting the stage. All right, and I have to speed up here. So understand ahead of time, what is it exactly that you're looking for? What are the skills that are absolutely required for this position versus what are the things that you're somewhat comfortable with someone learning on the job? And then as you bring someone into the interview, I definitely think it makes sense to start with a pretty big overview question, asking them to tell them about themselves or something equally broad, just because it allows them to start talking without, before you get into a lot of the specific, very, very difficult questions. Looking for the narrative. This is something I think is very interesting. I often love to ask people questions like, why did you take that job? Or what did you learn from this experience? Why did you decide to do this? If you make someone give you the narrative behind the decision making that they made, you will generally get one of 2 things. Either you will get a very vague answer that often means that there's a bit of a lack of critical thinking, or you will have this very passionate human narrative of exactly why they made the choices they did that often is, I think, much more insightful than their answers to a much more classic interview question. But then it's important as well to be specific. Most people, when they are interviewing, have prepared a number of kind of standard answers to questions, and so it can be really helpful to dig into that and say things like, why was this project different because you were involved? What would your boss or employees say about working with you? Not fun questions to answer, but very, very good ones to ask. Don't hug the interview, very self-explanatory. A lot of times people get so excited to tell a candidate about their company that they end up speaking for the first 15 minutes. And at this point, again, you've lost the opportunity to hear what they have to say, and sometimes you've also made them wonder if meetings at the company are going to be a similar experience. And then finally, partner up. You will often notice things with two people in the room that you would never notice with one. So I especially recommend this at later stages. I find it very, very interesting sometimes if one person does the majority of the talking and the other person does the majority of the watching or the note-taking, because again, you can sometimes find very, very interesting patterns that you may not have noticed. For unsexy companies, I think that sometimes this can be a bit of an advantage. One of the things that you want as a founder, as a hiring manager, is to have people who genuinely are dying to work at your company. They're excited about what you specifically do, and they want to be a part of it. And when you are in an industry that is very sexy, you might get some of those people, but you also get a lot of people who just really want to work in your industry, and it can be very hard to sort them out. This often leads to a lot of turnover, a lot of retention issues. And so I tend to think that being in a somewhat unsexy industry, especially in the early days, can be in some ways more of a blessing than a curse, because it filters out some of those people and it lets you really dig into why specifically is this the company that you want to work at. You can get a good answer to that question. You know you might have someone who's going to go the extra mile. Focusing on unique advantages. This is also an area where I think a lot of startups and smaller companies have such an incredible advantage over bigger companies. A lot of people come to their job search with specific goals and things that they're excited about. And they may not tell you those in the first interview because they're often more trying to figure out what it is that you're looking for. But as you go down the road with a particular candidate, people generally will open up about whether they're excited to speak, to represent the company publicly, to have certain differences in their work style. One of the things that we do is sit down every 3 months with people and ask them to share one personal or professional goal that the team can specifically help with, and then we write them all down and kind of track accountability. We also have shared documents that we pass around within the company saying who wants to go to conferences, who wants to go to dev events, who wants to learn any of these languages, Photoshop skills, etc., Python, whatever it is. You don't have to be in that department to say that you'd like to sign up and learn, and then we do our best to provide opportunities, and I think that's something you can do as a small company. I will go ahead and wrap it up, and have to save my amazing onboarding slides for another time. But thank you so much. Those are my ABCs of understanding, attracting, finding, interviewing, onboarding great talent. Thanks.